Thank you for attending both in person and on Zoom. For those of you who are here in person, there obviously is food and drinks in the back. Help yourself. And this is meant to be informal. So feel free to get up at any time and grab food. And then also if there are questions as we're presenting, feel free to raise your hand and ask, or if you're participating remotely, you can send a question through the chat. So you have the planning and building team here tonight, and we're going to go over a variety of things related to ADUs, both changes we're proposing to our ordinance to comply with state law. And then we're also going to be going over some resources that are available. So Claire is going to kick things off.
All right, so I'm going to get us set up here. We're going to do kind of a pre-survey to collect some information from you guys before we start our presentation. All right, so on screen, for folks that have a smart device with them, there's a QR code that you can scan that'll take you to the interactive survey. And then you could also join the survey at menti.com. And once that opens up, there's a little passcode at the top, and it'll connect you to the survey as well. And if you're on Zoom, you'll also be able to join the survey as well by scanning the QR code and then typing in that passcode. I see some folks are still pulling it up. I'll give you another minute or two. Is everyone able to pull that up? Okay, great. I'll go on to our first question. So the first question is, what do you hope to learn about ADUs from the workshop? And this one will allow you to select multiple answers. All right, thank you for your input. We're going to go to our next question. So this next question is, where are you in the process of building an ADU? Are you just curious, learning information, or are you thinking of designing? Which boat do you fall into? All right, next question. What is your primary reason for considering or building an ADU?
Don't be shy. We won't know who you are if you're answering.
All right, next question. How do the following Yeah, we're doing a survey we started. It's a kind of interactive survey that we can do together. So this question is, how do the following statements resonate with you? And I believe this one kind of lets you slide on the sliding scale of whether you strongly agree or somewhere in the middle or strongly disagree on the other end. I'll give you a minute with this one just because there are 4 different statements. All right. Next one is, what concerns, if any, do you have about the construction of ADUs in Corte Madera? And this one's a free response, and your response will show on the screen, but it is anonymous. All right, thanks for sending those in. And I think that was our last question, so we're going to go back to the presentation now. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of information, some background info about what is an ADU. An ADU is a separate dwelling unit that can be detached, attached, or within the primary residence. ADUs provide complete independent living amenities. This includes a separate entrance, a full bathroom, a kitchen, which we define as a sink with hot and cold running water, a fridge, an oven or a cooktop, and then space for storage. And as I'm sure many of you have heard, ADUs are given special flexibility and relaxed zoning standards in some instances, which has made them really popular across the state and people looking to create more units on their property. There are a variety of different ways that you can add an accessory unit to your property. There's kind of the classic detached, separate structure, but there's also attached ADUs as well as variety of combinations of expansions, interior space conversions, and then on the bottom, you also see garage conversions and above garage units. You may have also heard of a junior ADU, JADU for short. These are different than regular ADUs because they're located within existing walls of the primary home. This could include within an attached garage. ADUs require JADUs require owner occupancy, which means that the owner either has to live in the main residence or in the JADU. They also have a max size requirement of 500 square feet, and they must have a separate exterior entrance and an efficiency kitchen, which includes cooking appliances as well as counter and storage areas. JADUs may share a bathroom with the primary residence, though. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about detached ADUs, attached ADUs. Here's some examples of detached ADUs. On the left is an 800 square foot detached ADU at 10 South Way. And then on the right is a 610 square foot detached ADU at 2 Lanyard Cove. And this one's also raised to meet FEMA standards. Yep, both new construction. Detached units. On this screen are some examples of attached ADUs. The unit on the left at 525 Tamalpais Drive is a 587 square foot attached unit. And then on the right at 267 Golden Hind Passage is an above garage unit. That's a little larger. It's 820 square feet. So these are both attached to existing residences. Now I'm going to hand it off to Tracy.
Hey, everybody in the room and online too. My name is Tracy. I'm a planner with the town of Corte, Madera. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how state law has changed fairly recently. We are working on updating our ADU ordinance. As you all know, the state provides laws related to ADUs and JADUs, and the town has its own ordinance related to ADUs and JADUs. And of course, it needs to be consistent with state law. The last time that we updated our ADU ordinance was in 2020. And for similar reasons, state law changed back then. So we needed to update our ADU ordinance. Fast forward to 2023 and 2024, additional ADU bills were signed by the governor. Mostly the changes were related to height, allowed height of ADUs. There's some change to setback regulations and fire sprinklers requirements. And then there's also an additional bill that requires local jurisdictions to have a pre-approved ADU plan program, which is basically a set of plans that have already been reviewed by for permitting requirements that owners could elect to utilize and customize for their own ADUs. This slide coming up next is going to show a map. We've permitted about 63 ADUs since 2020, and you can see they're all over Corte Madera in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, like Claire talked about. There's another 4 that are currently under review with our building department. The size of ADUs that we've approved, they range in size from very small at about 180 square feet all the way up to 1,200 square feet. JADUs, of course, they have a maximum size, but they range from also similarly small, about 162 square feet all the way up to 497. And I'll talk real quickly about the changes that I mentioned to state law. If you could go ahead and jump to the next slide. You can stop me any time along here if you have a question. Our existing regulations allow up to 2 units. There's lots of shapes and sizes of ADUs. You have interior, you have new attached, you have an ADU created from an accessory structure, and you have new detached ADU construction. And the only way under current regulations, to get the 2 units is to combine a detached ADU with a JADU. So then you'd have your primary residence, a JADU within the primary residence, and a detached ADU for the 2 extra units. Yes. These are the existing. These are existing in the town, which we're working to update. So existing allows 2 units proposed that we will be adopting is the maximum of 3 units. So on the right-hand side, you'll be able to do 3 units. You would be able to combine an interior ADU within the residence with a JADU. This is consistent with state law. So the town will be bringing this to our decision makers to clarify that 3 units are allowed, the right-hand side of the slide. That makes sense? They allow 2 detached on a multifamily property. And we've seen that in Corte Madera. There's 2 detached new construction units at a multifamily property at the corner of El Camino and Paradise Drive. If you live in East Corte Madera, you might have seen those. All right, moving on. Another change that we are making consistent with the new state law is related to height. Right now, again, these are existing regulations were that attached and detached were limited to 16 feet in height. And an ADU above a garage, of course, can be 25 feet in height. Those are existing. New state laws change some of those height maximums. You can have a detached ADU that's within a half mile of a major transit stop at 18 feet in height, and you can have an additional 2 feet in height in some instances. We don't in Corte Madera have any single family residences, single family parcels that are within a half mile of a major transit stop. So we don't think we'll see the 18 to 20 foot high detached ADUs. So that means most of you, if you're constructing detached, you're going to have a 16-foot tall ADU maximum. A detached ADU on a multifamily property that has a multi-story building can be 18 feet in height. So if, yes. No, it's defined in the public resource code as it's based on, Martha, chime in.
It's based on headways of how frequent a bus is stopping at a bus stop. So you need to have 15-minute headways. So my understanding is really the only jurisdictions in Marin County that have properties within a half mile of a major transit stop is Larkspur, because they have the ferry terminal. San Rafael obviously does. They have some buses that run frequently, and also if you're adjacent to a smart train station as well.
Moving on, probably the biggest change in terms of allowed height. Existing regulation would allow an attached ADU, meaning it's constructed as a physical expansion of the primary residence, to be 16 feet. And now state law is saying that the attached ADU can be up to 25 feet in height, or which would be a maximum of 2 stories. So that's pretty big difference between 16 feet now up to 25 feet. And there's not a change to the allowed height of an ADU above a garage. That remains at 25. Sorry, say that again. Correct. Correct. The proposed regulations are coming from the state was the question. And yes, the town is required to have an ordinance that complies with those. And then just for those on Zoom, the previous question was related to the definition of a major transit stop. So that's what Martha was talking about there. Sorry if you couldn't hear that. Just before we leave allowed height, we'll talk a little bit later about the town's proposed flexibility for ADUs in the flood zone, where we may allow those to be more than 16 feet up to 20 feet in height if they have to be raised for FEMA purposes. Setbacks, there's not huge changes with setbacks. Everybody probably has heard that ADUs, when they're 800 square feet or less, that they can reduce the applicable side and rear yard setbacks to 4 feet. If they're larger than that, of course, they need to comply with the same setbacks that apply to your primary residence. Probably the big change from the state is that last line item on the right-hand side of this slide, that says that a front yard setback requirement could not preclude construction of an 800 square foot or less ADU, which really means that if there's nowhere else on the property to construct an ADU, that we should relax the required front yard setback, which we think the bar is pretty high for that because there's so many configurations for ADUs that are possible on a lot. But nevertheless, we do need to comply with that regulation that allows reduction in the front yard setback if necessary. There are objective development standards that we have in Corte Madera that we apply to ADUs. Those standards are related to exterior lighting or landscaping or tree removals, window size and location relative to property lines, and then how much grading is necessary for an ADU. And so we apply those standards to all ADUs, regardless of their size. And in order to be consistent with state law and the interpretation of state law, these objective development standards going forward, they can't be applied to any and all ADU. They could only be applied to ADUs that qualify as a statewide exemption. Excuse me, that do not qualify as a statewide exemption ADU. A statewide exemption ADU is a detached 800 square foot or less ADU or an interior ADU or JADU. Statewide exemption means that the only standards we can apply are height, size, and location, and they just need only a building permit. Anything that's not statewide exempt, meaning if it's an attached ADU or it's more than 800 square feet, then we can apply those objective standards. Yes. Statewide exemption is a term used to refer to ADUs that are exempt from any objective standards that we may decide to include in our zoning ordinance. These qualified ADUs, the only standards we can apply to them are height, size, location. And that is a detached ADU that's 800 square feet or less, 16 feet height, and maintains at least a 4-foot side and rear setback. Would be an example of a statewide exempt ADU. Same with one that's constructed within the walls of an existing residence. Maybe there's a better way you could put it. In other words,
Yeah, so if you qualify as a statewide exemption, and this is a term we've included a definition in the draft ordinance. We currently don't have a definition, but if you fall within those parameters, then you just need a building permit. You don't need to go through a planning process as a first step. And then there are no additional objective standards are applied beyond your maximum height, your maximum size, or your required setbacks. Okay, so the next section are some proposed policy amendments and considerations. So these next few changes are not required by state law, but they're things that we are recommending we make some changes to facilitate construction of ADUs in Corte Madera. So the first is related to the height of an ADU in a floodplain. So as Tracy mentioned, a detached ADU is limited to a maximum height of 16 feet. And any ADU in a floodplain is required to meet FEMA standards. So that means it needs to be raised a foot above base flood elevation. So the height that it needs to be raised depends on what the elevation is of the property, and it can vary widely in the floodplain. So what we've found is it's challenging for people to meet FEMA regulations and also comply with the 16-foot height limit. So what we're recommending is that in instances when an ADU needs to be raised to comply with these standards, that additional height be allowed up to a maximum of 20 feet. And you would only get an additional foot of height for each foot you're required to raise the ADU. So if you needed to raise it 2 feet to comply with FEMA, then the height you would be allotted would be 18 feet. And then we're also recommending that the side and rear yard setbacks increase an additional foot for each additional foot of height. So if the ADU is 18 feet, then instead of a 4-foot setback, you would need a 6-foot setback. And I know that's kind of a lot, so we do have a couple of graphics to kind of help visually explain this. So this shows the maximum height of 16 feet. So this is the current maximum height of a detached ADU. And you can see that the setbacks can be as little as 4 feet for your side and your rear yard. So these are current regulations under our current ordinance. And the next slide shows what we've proposed. So the ADU could increase a total of 4 feet up to a maximum of 20 feet. And again, that allowance to go taller is only if you're in a flood zone, and it's only by the height that you need to raise your house, the ADU, to comply. So if you only need to raise it 1 foot to comply with FEMA, you would only be able to have a height of 17 feet. And then again, for each additional foot of height, the side and rear yard setback would increase by a foot. So in the case of a 20-foot tall ADU, instead of a 4-foot side and rear yard setback, it would be an 8-foot side and rear yard setback. Anyone have any questions about that? It's really to allow structures to comply with FEMA, which is the requirement to raise structures out of the floodplain. So it's really so that future structures are protected from flooding impacts. Yeah, so this proposed change would only apply if you're in a flood zone. So this would not apply to other areas of Corte Madera. It's just if the property is in a flood zone and the structure needs to be raised to meet FEMA requirements. The reason we're recommending an increased setback is because there could be additional impacts to neighbors if it's a taller structure. And having a 20-foot tall structure 4 feet from someone's rear property boundary may be imposing to the neighbor. So we're trying to kind of balance both homeowners and then also adjacent neighbors that may be impacted. You need to meet building code requirements, but other than that, yeah.
There's a couple questions on it.
And there's a couple questions on the chat from our remote participants that we're going to answer those as well.
Good. One question from Albert is there any height allowance for hillside sloped lots?
There currently is none proposed for a hillside lot, so the height would be 16 feet.
The second question is the ratio of 1 foot height to 1 foot setback too important? How has that been determined?
So this is something that we allowed when we did an SB9 ordinance, which SB9 is another legislation that allows for housing in certain cases. And as part of that, we adopted an ordinance that allowed increased height in the flood zones, and we used the same formula. Okay, continuing on. The next policy consideration is related to an ADU permit. So in Corte Madera, certain ADUs require an ADU permit as the first step in the process. And then after having an ADU permit approved, then you would submit for your building permit. So in our existing regulations, an ADU permit is required for any attached ADU, and this is regardless of the size. It's required for a detached ADU that's greater than 800 square feet. And in certain cases, it's required for an ADU that's created from an existing accessory structure. So what staff has proposed is to only require ADU permits for attached ADUs if those attached ADUs are taller than 16 feet or greater than 800 square feet. And the reason we recommended this change is it aligns with detached ADUs. So a detached ADU does not need an ADU permit if it's 16 feet in height or less and 800 square feet or less. So we are recommending that certain attached ADUs would no longer have to go through this planning process as the first step. Also, detached ADUs greater than 800 square feet, we still recommend that require an ADU permit. And in some cases, ADU permit would also be required for accessory structures if the structure is increasing by more than 20% or 150 square feet. And an ADU permit, just to give a little bit more information about it, it's again a planning process that you go through first. It adds about 4 to 6 weeks to the process, and the cost is $850. And we do send out a courtesy notice as part of that process, which notifies all neighbors within 300 feet of the application. However, neighbors that comment on the application, you're limited in what you can comment on. You can only comment on if the ADU complies with the objective standards of the ordinance. So, and we're going to be taking our feedback from everyone on these particular topics and, your thoughts on what we proposed.
The question was, if you put an ADU on top of an existing garage, does the ADU include the square footage, size of the ADU include the square footage of the garage underneath?
And if the garage is providing parking to the existing primary residence, then we would not count the square footage of the garage as part of the ADU. It would only be counted if someone was proposing a new garage that was providing parking for the ADU, then that would be included in the total square footage.
The question was whether we have written down these regulations and where can they be found online?
Yes, so we had a study session at the Planning Commission last week, and we presented them with a draft ordinance that showed all of the recommended changes. And there was both a red line version of that ordinance, so you can really see what we were proposing to change. And after this workshop, we'll plan to send out a recording of this meeting, and also we can include the draft ordinance as well. So we have some sign-in sheets. So if you're interested in receiving that information, be sure to sign in. Okay, next, yes. The garage square footage would only count in the overall square footage of the ADU if the garage provides parking for the ADU. So in most cases, if you have an existing garage and you're creating an ADU from existing space, you're not required to provide parking. So we really would just be looking at the ADU, the size of it.
The situation that I'm looking at, yes, the garage is used by the future occupant of the ADU. So it would be included in the square footage, right?
Only if only if a parking space is required for the ADU. So in certain cases, you don't need to provide parking because you're within a half mile of a transit stop. So then if that's the case, even if there is parking on site for the ADU, we're not looking at that parking in the total size of the ADU.
Okay, only if it's a requirement. If there's other parking available, like in the driveway, that would cover parking requirement.
And the majority of ADUs, at least in the western side of Corte Madera, are not required to provide parking because they are within a half mile of transit stops, at bus stops.
Yeah, that's also right. Thank you.
Another question in the chat. If a garage was converted to an ADU less than 800 square feet, would there be a permit required in the proposed regulations?
So you would not need an ADU permit because it's existing space. You would need a building permit. So a building permit is always required, but in that case, not an ADU permit. Okay, so the next slide shows some pictures of ADUs. These are all attached ADUs that have been built in Corte Madera. And on the left-hand side are pictures of ADUs that did require an ADU permit, but we're recommending that in the future they no longer do. So both of these ADUs are less than 800 square feet in size, and they're less than 16 feet in height. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, this shows examples of ADUs where we're recommending that an ADU permit still be required. And again, that's because the size is greater than 800 square feet and the height exceeds 16 feet.
Hold on, Ivan.
Building permit is the timeline.
It's
So
just-
the ADU permit will take a 4 to 6 week notice, where a building permit.
Yeah, it's really time and money. So an ADU permit, it's an $850 fee.
Right.
And then about a 4 to 6 week of additional time. Whereas if you don't need an ADU permit, you submit directly to the building department. And so saves time. Okay, so we are going to go to a post survey. So again, you can join at menti.com. This is the same survey that we used before, and we want to get feedback from everyone on these two policy considerations that we just talked about.
So we are having a situation where we're converting an old-fashioned in-law unit that's down in the basement of a house to make it conforming with ADU, and the property is rented out. So per what I hear now, we wouldn't be required to do the ADU, but does it make a difference if the property is rented out or if it's owner occupied?
So is
So
this your ADU on Oakdale?
623
Okay, yeah,
Avenue?
so that didn't need an ADU permit. You just submitted for your building permit. So the process doesn't
Oh.
change at all, what we're recommending.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah. I was wondering, we just spend a whole lot of money to have.
yeah, so even if you don't need an ADU permit, there still is cost associated with hiring design professionals. State law has removed a lot of barriers to ADUs, but it's still expensive to build ADUs, and you still need to hire design professionals to help you through the process. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's not changing. Even if an ADU permit's not required, that's still,
Why we building ADU if it is so expensive? We have so limited money. What is the reason to build ADU?
Less expensive.
and it does add property value, as well. And people build. It can be expensive. And we can talk, yep. And we can talk after too. Okay, so moving on to the additional post-survey questions. Everyone's on the Menti. Okay, and the QR code's up on the screen.
You can go to menti.com, menti.com. Yep, it'll give you a little blank space to plug in the however many digit code. It's at the top of the screen. It's in the chat for those of you on the Zoom. Claire will get us started in a couple seconds.
A lot of it is similar. Like the changes we're recommending to the flood zone, that's wouldn't necessarily apply to other jurisdictions. So if you live in another jurisdiction, you should always contact the planning division to. There's a lot of similarities because of state law. Okay. So the first question, so again, this is what we talked about. So an ADU permit currently is required for any attached ADU, regardless of what the size is. And staff has recommended that they no longer be required for attached ADUs that are less than 800 square feet and don't exceed 16 feet. So we want to get feedback from the group on when you think an ADU permit should be required. Wait another minute to give people a chance to answer. That ADU permit should always be required. Yes. Yes. Yep. So do you think, is that your answer? Yeah, it's kind of even between the group. Okay, so the next question is, what do you think about the recommendation to allow a detached ADU to be greater than 16 feet up to a max of 20 in order to comply with FEMA regulations? And again, the increase to height is dependent upon how much the ADU needs to be raised to comply with FEMA, and the maximum height would be 20 feet, and then an increased setback would be required an additional foot for each additional foot of height. You don't like it? Okay. You're in the minority, Phil. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for taking the survey. So we have a couple more slides, and then we're going to open up to Q&A after that. So one of the recent changes to state law requires that all jurisdictions in California have a pre-approved ADU plans program in place. So the Marin County jurisdictions are currently working together on this program, and we're also working with the ADU Center. And it's required to be in place by January 1st. So it's the upcoming deadline that we're working on. So there are two phases to the pre-approved program, and this is all kind of outlined in state legislation. Part one is that a designer would submit a set of plans that is not attached to a particular property. So it's, it could be an 800 square foot detached ADU, and it's not tied to a particular location. And so the jurisdiction reviews that plan, and we're really only looking at from the foundation up. And so all the building codes are being evaluated, like your plumbing, the mechanical, your energy codes, making sure that it complies with building codes. And the town has 60 days to complete that review. And then there's some, back and forth between the town and the designer. And then once the plan is approved, then we're required to post information on that pre-approved plan on our website. And then members of the public can look at these pre-approved plans, and then it also includes the designer's information. And then homeowners can contact that designer. And the point of this is that it should save time and money in the process if a plan set has already been reviewed. So the next part is when you're evaluating the site specific rules. So that the town would not do a review of the things that have already been reviewed, like the building codes, but we would evaluate that, at this point, a site plan would be submitted that would show where the ADU is proposed on the property. And we would verify it to make sure it complies with setbacks and height and all of those other additional standards. And we're also would be looking at the foundation design as part of this process. So if it's in the flood zone, you need to be elevated to comply with those regulations. And the time that the town has to review these plans are less. It's 30 days because the idea is we've already reviewed a lot of the information. So the amount of time gets cut in half. So that's kind of what state law requires. The town is going above and beyond what is required by state law. And we're going to be rolling out a website called the ADU Accelerator. And this will include pre-approved plans that have potentially been approved in other places that the town can choose to evaluate and approve ourselves, and then put that information on this website. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to kind of ramp this up, but you should definitely kind of, if you're interested in ADUs, you should keep track of it, and we can send periodic updates when this website launches and there's information about ADUs, but it will have information about floor plans, a description of the ADU, and you can kind of peruse different options. We have a question. Yeah, so it'll be floor plans, and there'll be plans that the jurisdiction has already reviewed. So we would have looked at the building permit set of these and pre-approved them. Yeah, the state thinks so. I think that's why they created this program. So that is, challenging hillsides. So, the ADU piece would be pre-approved. And then as part of the phase 2, that's when a designer is evaluating how to make that pre-approved plan work on your particular property. So, and the pre-approved plans may not work on all sites depending on the complexities of the property. So it's always good, there'll be contact information of these designers. You can reach out and have those conversations early in the process. Sorry. So the question is if you want to modify one of these pre-approved plans, if that's something you can do. So it would no longer be pre-approved if you're making changes to it. So once you modify the plan, then we need to evaluate it. So you're really kind of limited in sticking with the plan as is. So there's less flexibility, I guess, a downside. So we're required to have kind of the pre-approved process in place by January 1st. But this ADU Accelerator, we'll probably be adding plans as we go. So on January 1st, there may not be a lot of pre-approved plans per se, but we need to be ready to accept plans that designers or architects submit to us to review through that process. So if you buy one of these plans, the question is, do you need to get an architect? You likely would need someone to still help you through the process to do the site-specific analysis. But it should save some time and some money.
There's a question in the chat, Martha. Are the pre-approved plans for detached ADUs only?
Yes, the pre-approved plans are only for detached ADUs. So it does not apply to an attached. Yes, so the question was, where is the ADU calculator? So there's a list of resources that we passed out, and that's on our ADU webpage for anyone who's participating remotely. But the ADU calculator is available on the ADU Marin website. So if you haven't been to that website, it's a great website to explore. There's a lot of really great information. And one of the things you can do through the ADU Marin website is you can request a one-on-one feasibility consult. So anyone who's considering building an ADU, I think you definitely want to do that because you can meet with someone and have speak with them about your property. Okay, so we're actually at the Q&A. I think we've kind of rolled into Q&A. So we'll walk around with a microphone, and we also have Scotty Morel from our building team with us. So if there's any specific building questions, we will defer to Scotty.
Are there, or do you recommend, or have you experienced with any prefab detached ADUs?
Two detached ADUs that they talked about that were on the corner of El Camino and Paradise. Those were prefab, pre-made, delivered to the site. The building division got more involved with the foundation and the actual site and utilities. And once those were ready, then yeah.
But not so much necessarily around here, but I mean, they seem like a good, quick idea, but I don't know if that's your experience or not. We'd be interested in the small ADU, but detached. Recommend building from scratch or the kits?
I think it's just a personal choice of if you're customizing or if you want something that is standard out of the box model.
Does that save money?
But money's always involved.
So think the kits can save money?
I haven't priced out the kits, so I don't know if they would, I think it would be more of a comparison of what does a manufacturer charge for it out the door delivery versus getting bids from licensed contractors to give you a stick built version.
But sounding like the town hasn't really worked with a lot of kits.
We maybe half a dozen.
Okay.
I will say sometimes the companies aren't well-versed in some of the challenges about developing in Marin County, especially if you're on a hillside lot. I think prefab homes can be very challenging. So it depends on your property and, if there's any site constraints. Sometimes custom builds may work better in that situation. But I think we probably have about half a dozen from different companies, and we're happy to provide, you could come in and look at those plans. Yes, it likely will. Yep.
And we are seeing some repeat customers in terms of designers and contractors where in Marin County or the greater Bay Area, ADUs are becoming kind of their sweet spot. So when you're interviewing those design professionals, asking them, is there someone like that this is their wheelhouse is ADUs, might realize some efficiencies with one of them too.
So will there be a pre-approved prefab kits? Will you be looking at that as one of the options?
We likely will, because a lot of those kind of kits have already been pre-approved. So the town can do a review of them and then add it to the kind of the gallery of ADUs.
How would you deal with the sewer, all the utilities that needed to be connected?
We would treat it the same way as building any structure, whether it was a kit or stick built or building any structure, any habitable structure, whether it's a full house, large home, an 700 square foot ADU, all utilities, all building codes apply. So there is no real change on the building side.
ADUs seem to often be associated with somebody builds them because they want to rent them out. But are there any restrictions or differences if you build one, but you don't rent it out right away? Visitors or a guest or a family member to live. That change?
Not for us. The only real sort of occupancy type of requirement we have is related to JADUs. Those are deed restricted, where the owner will either say they're living in the JADU or the primary residence, and then they can't be used as short-term rentals, so rentals less than 30 days. Correct, you can do that. Yep.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
That's all right. I'm just wondering if there's any incentives for building these, since they really want to increase the rental, the amount of rental units in Marine. Is there any kind of incentives to do this?
So if there are any incentives, the state has created incentives through reducing, standards related to setbacks. Also fees are reduced for ADUs. We can't charge certain fees for ADUs that are 750 square feet or less. But as far as the town, we do not have any additional incentives beyond these state incentives.
On a detached ADU, just a permit process. So you have to apply for the ADU permit, and that's 6 weeks. And then is there a 60-day process with the drawings? So you know what I mean? Because I know there's 60 days once you hand in the drawings, but then you also mentioned the ADU permit process is 6 weeks. So is that 6 weeks and 2 months? So you're kind of looking at 4 months, best case scenario on a detached ADU.
So a detached ADU does not currently require an ADU permit if it's 800 square feet or less. So I would say most detached ADUs we've seen kind of fall in that category, and then you submit directly to the building division for a building permit.
But if it was over 800 square.
Yep. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So ADUs over 800 square feet do require the ADU permit. We have a couple additional slides that we can go over. So next steps, we're going to further develop the zoning ordinance amendments that we talked about tonight. And then we likely will have a planning commission hearing in November. And the commission would make a recommendation to the town council. And then we potentially would be at the town council with an ordinance for their consideration in December. And again, the pre-approved plans program will be launching in 2025. So keep your eyes out for that. And the next slide, just some resources. I mentioned the ADU Center. This is a really great resource. The ADU Center, they previously were in Sonoma and Napa, and they've been promoting ADUs for the last, I think, about 5 years, and they've expanded to Marin County. So we're really excited to be part of the partnership, and they are available for one-on-one feasibility consults. So if you go to the website, right on the homepage, you can sign up for a one-on-one consultation. And then they're also available to, answer questions along the way. And then we have obviously an ADU website with different informations related to ADU regulations in Corte Madera, and we'll continue to update this website to include information on public meetings and any staff reports that are drafted. And planning and building staff are always available for questions. We have enhanced counter hours on Tuesday and Thursday mornings where you can come in and speak with planning, building, and public works and kind of get all of your questions answered at once. And then we're always available by email and phone as well. So we're always happy to help and answer any questions. Okay, so I think that's all we had planned. We're available for more questions if anyone else has some. I would say there is a lot of overlap between regulations just because the state has adopted so many bills and we all need to comply with state law. So things related to height and setbacks and number of ADUs, that all should be consistent. Each ordinance is a little bit different and has its kind of idiosyncrasy. So you always do want to connect with whatever jurisdiction, it is. But we do all work together. All the Marin County jurisdictions are part of a housing working group, and we talk about ADUs a lot. Most of the jurisdictions are participating in the ADU Center project and the ADU plan. So there is a lot of overlap between the jurisdictions. So a junior ADU, by definition in state law, it's limited to a maximum size of 500 square feet. And then also it has to be within the walls of an existing or proposed residence, and that can include a garage. As far as materials go, if you're in a WUI, you do need to comply with those requirements. So building code requirements always apply to ADUs. Really, the only exception is for junior ADUs. There's some things you don't have to comply with. Okay, I think that's a wrap. So there's lots of food left if anyone wants some pizza for the road.